Hi everyone. Welcome back to Goodnight Stories. My name is Lyra, and I will be your guide into whatever book we decide to read tonight. From young readers to young adult novels, my hope is to give you a comfortable space to listen to a story while you work or doze. So, sit back, relax, grab a cup of tea. Tonight, we jump back into Erin Hunter's A Dangerous Path, the fifth book in the original Warrior series. Chapter 11. The sun was rising over the trees as Fireheart emerged from the warrior's den. Shaking a scrap of dead leaf from his fur, he took a deep breath of the crisp air and extended his forelegs in a long stretch. After the previous night's gathering, he was almost surprised to see life in the camp going on as usual. Ashpaw and Cloudpaw were busily patching out the outer wall with twigs. Goldenflower and Willowpellet were watching their kits just outside the nursery, where Brightpaw had stopped to play with them, and Whitestorm was padding into the clearing with his jaws full of fresh kill. Fireheart could sense tension in the air, but so far none of his fears of attack seemed to have come to anything. He looked around for Sandstorm, who had led the dawn patrol, but she didn't seem to be back yet. She had not been among the cats who had gone to the gathering, and Fireheart desperately wanted to talk to her about what had happened. Fireheart, the voice was Bluestar's. Fireheart swung around to see his leader trotting across the clearing from her den. Yes, Bluestar, what is it? Bluestar jerked her head. Come to my den, we need to talk. As Fireheart followed her, he noticed her jerky steps and twitching tail. She looked like a cat about to launch herself into battle, yet there was no enemy in sight. Reaching her den, the blue-gray she-cat padded across to her bedding and sat there facing Fireheart. You heard that hypocrite Tallstar last night, she hissed. He refused to admit that his cats have been stealing our prey. So there's only one thing for ThunderClan to do. We must attack. Fireheart stared at her, jaws gaping. But Bluestar, he stammered, we can't do that. Our clan isn't strong enough. He couldn't help remembering that they would have had 4 extra warriors by now if Bluestar had agreed to promote the apprentices, but he didn't dare mention that to her. We can't afford to have warriors injured or maybe killed. Bluestar fixed her eyes on him in a look of fierce hostility. Are you saying that ThunderClan is too weak to defend itself? Defending ourselves is very different from launching an attack, Fireheart meowed desperately. Besides, there's no real proof that WindClan stole. Bluestar bared her teeth, her fur bristling as she rose to her paws and took a threatening step toward Fireheart. Are you questioning me? She snarled. With an effort, Fireheart stood his ground. I don't want needless bloodshed, he told her quietly. All the signs tell us that there's a dog loose in the forest, and that's what has been taking the rabbits. And I tell you that dogs don't wander alone. They come and go with their 2 legs. Then where did the dog scent come from? Silence! Bluestar lashed out with one paw, barely missing Fireheart's nose. He forced himself to stand still. We will travel tonight and attack WindClan at dawn. Fireheart's heart lurched. It was an honor for a warrior to fight for his clan, but never before had he been faced with such an unjust battle. He did not want to shed ThunderClan or WindClan blood for no good reason. Did you hear me, Fireheart? Bluestar demanded. You will choose the warriors and give them their orders. They must be ready by moonset. Her eyes were blue flames. Fireheart almost felt they could sear him to ash, just as the fire had destroyed the forest. Yes, Bluestar, but he began. Are you afraid of WindClan? The old leader spat. Or are you just used to cringing before StarClan, that you won't defy them and fight for the rights of your clan? Or are you so used to cringing before StarClan that you won't defy them and fight for the rights of your clan? She paced to one side of her den, spun around, and paced back again, thrusting out her muzzle toward her deputy. You disappoint me. You, out of all of my warriors. How can I believe you will fight with all your strength when you question my orders like this? She hissed. You leave me no choice, Fireheart. I will lead this attack myself. Objections raced through Fireheart's mind. Blue Star growing old and losing strength. She was on her last life. She wasn't thinking clearly, but in the face of her fury he could voice none of them. Instead he dipped his head respectfully. "If you wish, Blue Star." "Then go and do as I ordered." She kept that fiery gaze trained on him as he backed out of the den. "You will come with us, but remember that I will be watching you," she growled after him. In the clearing outside, Fireheart shivered as if he had just dragged himself out of icy water. His duty was to choose the warriors for the attack on WindClan, and tell them what Bluestar had ordered so that they would be ready to leave at moonset. Yet every hair on his pelt protested against this. A dog had stolen the rabbits, not WindClan. It could not be the will of StarClan to attack an innocent clan. Bluestar was simply wrong. Fireheart found his pause, taking him to Cinderpelt's den. Perhaps she could advise him. The medicine cat's wisdom and her special bond with StarClan might help her to see the way forward more clearly than he could. But when he reached Cinderpelt's clearing and called out to her, there was no reply. Fireheart stuck his head a little way into the cleft in the rock and saw that the den was empty, except for the neat piles of herbs stacked along the side. As he pushed his way out of the fern tunnel, not sure what to do now, he caught sight of Thornpaw padding past with a load of moss for the elder's bedding. The apprentice dropped his burden when he saw the deputy and meowed. "Cinderpelt's out collecting herbs, Fireheart." "Where?" Fireheart asked. If she was near the camp, he could go and find her. But Thornpaw shrugged. "Don't know, sorry." He picked up the moss and went on. Fireheart stood motionless for a few moments, his head spinning with fear and confusion. He could not ask any of the other cats for advice, because a deputy should never question his leader's orders. He could not even talk to Sandstorm much as he wanted to, because she was bound by the warrior code to obey her leader. There was only one hope left. Slowly he padded back to the warrior's den, meeting Brindleface on her way out. "I'm going to catch up on some sleep," he explained in answer to her inquiring look. "I want to be fit for the night patrol." He couldn't bring himself to tell her what he was really planning for that night. What was really planned for that night. Brindleface's eyes softened with sympathy. "You do look a bit tired," she meowed. "You're working too hard, Fireheart." She gave his ear a quick lick and padded off toward the pile of fresh kill. To Fireheart's relief, no other cats were inside the den, and he did not have to answer any more questions as he curled himself deeply into the moss and fern. If he could just sleep for a while, he might be able to meet with Spotted Leaf and ask for her guidance. Then he remembered his previous dream, when he had searched for Spotted Leaf in the dark and fearful forest, and failed to find her. "Oh, Spotted Leaf, come to me now," he murmured. "I need you. I have to know what StarClan wants me to do." Fireheart found himself standing on the border of WindClan territory and looked across the stretch of bare moorland. A stiff breeze rippled over the grass, blowing through his fur. The moor was bounded by an eerie light, hiding the horizon. And the land behind Fireheart, he looked back, expecting to see oaks of 4 trees, though he could not remember traveling through the forest, but there was nothing there but the pale yellow glow. No cats were in sight. "Spotted Leaf?" he mewed uncertainly. There was no reply, but he thought he caught a faint trace of the sweet scent that had always announced her presence. He stiffened, raising his head and parting his jaws so that he could drink in the beloved smell. "Spotted Leaf?" he repeated. "Please come, I need you so much." A sudden warmth crept over him. A soft voice murmured, "I am here, Fireheart." He sensed that Spotted Leaf was somewhere behind him, and that if he turned his head, he would see her, but he could not move. It was as if cold jaws were gripping him, keeping his gaze fixed on the wind-swept moorland. As he stood rigid, Fireheart gradually realized that Spotted Leaf was not alone. Another scent wafted over him, painful in its familiarity. "Yellowfang?" he whispered. "Is that you?" A faint breath stirred his pelt, and he thought he could hear Yellowfang's rusty purr. "Oh, Yellowfang," he exclaimed. "I've missed you so much. Are you okay? Have you seen how well Cinderpelt is doing?" The words spilled out of him in his joy at the reunion with his old friend, but there was no reply, though Fireheart thought the purring grew stronger. Then Spotted Leaf's voice whispered softly into his ear. I have brought you here for a reason, Fireheart. Look at this place. Remember it. This is where a battle will not be fought, and blood will not be spilled. Then tell me how to stop it, Fireheart pleaded, knowing that she spoke of Bluestar's planned raid on the WindClan camp. But there was nothing more, only a gentle sigh that faded and became one with the wind. The paralysis that had gripped Fireheart released him, and he whipped around, but Spotted Leaf and Yellowfang had vanished. He drank in the air, desperate for the last trace of their scent, but there was nothing. Spotted Leaf, he wailed. Yellowfang, don't go. The light began to change, became the ordinary sunlight of a morning in Leaf Fall, and instead of the moorland, Fireheart saw above him a ragged pattern of branches against the sky, the fire-damaged covering of the warrior's den. He lay on his side among the moss, panting. Fireheart? An anxious voice came from just beside him, and he turned his head to see Sandstorm. She licked the fur around his ears. Are you all right? Yes, I'm fine. Fireheart dragged himself into a sitting position and flicked his ears to shake off the clinging moss. Just a dream, that's all. I've been looking for you, Sandstorm went on. We didn't see anything suspicious on the dawn patrol. Mousefur told me what happened at the gathering, and the pile of fresh kill is practically all gone. I thought we could go and hunt. I can't. Not just now, Sandstorm. I've things to do, but if you could take a patrol out, that would be great. Sandstorm gazed at him, the sympathetic look in her eyes fading. Well, okay, if you're too busy. She sounded offended, but Fireheart didn't know how he could explain. I'll get Brindleface and Brackenfur to come. She rose to her paws and stalked out without looking back at him. Fireheart looked at his paws and looked at his paw and rubbed it over his face, clinging to the precious memory of his dream. A battle will not be fought, and blood will not be spilled, he repeated to himself. Was Spotted Leaf trying to tell him not to worry, that somehow StarClan would stop the fighting, or did she mean that it was up to him to see that no blood was spilled? Fireheart was tempted to leave it all in the paws of StarClan. What could he do, when his clan leader had given him her orders? But if he obeyed Bluestar, wouldn't he be going against the will of StarClan? And even more, against all his instincts of what was right for his clan? Fireheart made up his mind. Whatever he had to do, ThunderClan must not fight WindClan. Chapter 12. Fireheart padded swiftly out of the camp, hoping no other cat would see him and ask him where he was going. The warrior code said that a clan leader's orders should be obeyed without question. Until now, Fireheart had always accepted that. He had never imagined that he would ever disobey Bluestar, and yet the time had come when he must challenge her orders or watch the destruction of his clan. The only way he could see of avoiding the battle was for Tallstar and Bluestar to meet together and talk about the evidence of prey theft in both of their territories. Once Bluestar understood that WindClan was suffering in just the same way as ThunderClan, Fireheart was sure she would call off the attack. He did not know what Bluestar would do to him afterward if she realized that he had gone to tell Tallstar without her permission. He just hoped she would eventually understand it was for the good of her clan. At the entrance to the Gorse Tunnel, Fireheart took a last look around the camp. For a moment he watched Brightpaw practicing the hunting crouch all by herself outside the apprentice's den. She crept lightly up on a dead leaf and pounced on it, trapping it with an outstretched paw. Well done, Fireheart called. Brightpaw looked up, her eyes glowing. Thank you, Fireheart. Fireheart nodded to her, then turned and headed through the Gorse Tunnel. The short meeting had strengthened his resolve, for the eager young apprentice represented all that was important within the clan. Fireheart knew that he could not let that be destroyed. By sun-high, Fireheart was approaching the stream that lay on the route to Four Trees. He stopped for a moment to rest. In his confusion and anxiety, he had not taken time to eat before he left the camp, and a rustle in the undergrowth reminded him of how hungry he was. He dropped into the hunter's crouch, only to realize a couple of heartbeats later that the sounds were not made by prey. He caught a glimpse of a familiar dark pelt and breathed in the scent of ThunderClan cats. Puzzled, Fireheart pressed himself to the ground behind a clump of fern. He hadn't ordered a patrol in this direction, so why were his clan cats here now? Then the undergrowth parted, and Darkstripe emerged, mewing sharply over his shoulder. Follow me. Try to keep up, can't you? Two small shapes appeared out of the bracken. Fireheart's eyes widened in surprise as he recognized Goldenflower's two kits. Bramblekit bounced into the open, batting at a fallen leaf, while Tawny followed more slowly. "I'm tired. My paws ache," the little tabby kit complained. "What, a strong kit like you?" Darkstripe meowed. "Don't be silly, it's not far now." "What isn't far?" Fireheart wondered in alarm. "What are you doing out here, and where are you taking these kits?" He expected to see Goldenflower with them. Surely her kits had never been this far from the nursery before, but she did not appear. Bramblekit scampered over to his sister and gave her a nudge. "Come on, it'll be worth it," he urged. Both kits hurried after Darkstripe to a shallow place where they crossed the stream, squealing in fear and excitement as the water swirled around their paws. On the far side of the stream, Darkstripe veered away from the route that led to Fortrees and headed instead along a much narrower path that twisted away under the trees. A burst of outrage shook Fireheart. He knew exactly where that path led. Darkstripe was taking the kits toward the border with ShadowClan. Fireheart had to wait for them to climb the slope beyond the stream before he dared to emerge from the ferns and follow. By the time he caught up, they were approaching the border. The strong reek of ShadowClan reached Fireheart, and he saw the kits stop and start sniffing the air. "Yuck, what's that?" Tawny squealed. "Is it a fox?" asked Bramblekit. "No, it's ShadowClan scent," Darkstripe replied. "Come on, we're nearly there." He led the kits across the border, Tawny complaining that she was getting the horrid scent all over her paws. Growing angrier still, Fireheart slid into the shelter of a hawthorn bush just on the ThunderClan side where he could watch without being seen. Close by, Darkstripe had come to a halt. The kits flopped down on the grass, exhausted, only to spring to their paws again a moment later when a clump of bracken rustled and another cat stepped into the open. The newcomer was Tigerstar. Fireheart froze, though he was hardly surprised. He had guessed that Darkstripe had been hoping to curry favor with Tigerstar by bringing his kits to see him. But the ShadowClan leader's prompt appearance suggested that this meeting had been arranged all along. Fireheart wondered if Goldenflower knew about this. She was not here with her kits, so perhaps she didn't even know that Darkstripe had taken them away. She might just think they had gone missing. She must be frantic, Fireheart thought. He tensed his muscles, ready to leap out and confront Darkstripe, but he stayed in his hiding place and made himself concentrate on what was happening in front of him. Tigerstar padded forward, the muscles rippling under his dark tabby pelt, until he stood in front of his two kits. For a moment he inspected them, and then bent his head to touch noses, first with Bramblekit and then with Tawny. Even though they could never have seen such a massive cat before, both kits stood bravely before him, and met his gaze without flinching. "Do you know who I am?" meowed Tigerstar. "Darkstripe said he would take us to meet our father," replied Bramblekit. "Are you our father?" Tawny added. "You smell a bit like us." Tigerstar nodded. "I am." The kits exchanged a wondering glance as Darkstripe mewed. "This is Tigerstar, the leader of ShadowClan." Their eyes grew huge, and Bramblekit breathed. "Wow! You're really a clan leader?" When Tigerstar dipped his head in agreement, Tawny mewed excitedly. "Why can't we come and live with you in your clan? You must have a really nice den." Tigerstar shook his head. "Your place is with your mother for now," he told them. "But that doesn't mean I'm not proud of you. They seem fine, strong kits." He meowed to Darkstripe. "When will they be apprenticed?" "In a moon or so," Darkstripe replied. "It's a pity I have an apprentice already, or I could mentor one of them myself." Fireheart's claws dug into the ground as a jolt of anger shot through him. "Bluestar and I decided who the mentors will be, not you, Darkstripe." He almost hissed the words out loud. "And you're the last cat we would choose," he added silently. Tigerstar turned his gaze back to his kits. "Can you hunt?" he asked them. "Can you fight? Do you want to be good warriors?" Both of the kits nodded vigorously. "I'm going to be the best warrior in the clan," Bramblekit boasted. Tawny refused to be outdone. "And I'll be the best hunter." "Good." Tigerstar gave each kit a quick lick on the head. Fireheart couldn't help remembering Greystripe and how his friend had left the clan of his birth so that he could stay with the kits he loved. Was it possible that Tigerstar was suffering just as much at being parted from Bramblekit and Tawny? Then Fireheart's blood ran cold as Bramblekit asked, "Please, Tigerstar, why are you the leader of ShadowClan when our mother is a ThunderClan cat?" "They don't know," Tigerstar asked Darkstripe. The warrior shook his head. "Well then," Tigerstar meowed, turning his back to the kits. "That's a long story. Sit down and I'll tell you." Fireheart realized this was the moment when he had to interrupt. The last thing he wanted was for Tigerstar to tell the kits a biased account of how he came to leave ThunderClan. One thing was for certain, Tigerstar would never admit that he had been a murderer and a traitor. Rising to his paws, Fireheart stepped out of the shelter of the hawthorn bush. "Good day, Tigerstar," he meowed. "You're a long way from your camp, and so are you, Darkstripe." His tone sharpened. "What are you doing here with these kits?" As he padded up to join them, he had the satisfaction of realizing that both Tigerstar and Darkstripe were dumbfounded by his appearance. For a heartbeat, they both gaped at him, while the kits bounced across the grass to meet him. "This is our father," Tawny Kit announced excitedly. "We came all the way from camp to see him." "Why did no cat tell us he was the leader of a clan?" Bramblekit piped up. Fireheart did not want to answer that question. Instead, he confronted Darkstripe with his eyes narrowed. "Well?" "How did you know we were here?" Darkstripe blustered. "I saw you crossing the stream. You were making enough racket to wake the whole forest." "Fireheart," Tigerstar dipped his head, the courteous greeting of a leader to the deputy of another clan. There was no hostility in his tone. "Blame me, not Darkstripe. I wanted to see my kits. You wouldn't deny me that, surely." "That's all very well," Fireheart replied in confusion, "but Darkstripe shouldn't have taken them without permission. It's dangerous to let kits wander so far away from their camp, especially with that dog loose in the forest," he added to himself. "They're not wandering, they're with me," Darkstripe pointed out. "What if a hawk attacked? There's still little cover in some of the parts of the forest. Have you forgotten Snowkit?" One of the kits let out a whimper, and Fireheart stopped. He didn't want to frighten them. "Take them back to camp, Darkstripe. Now." Darkstripe exchanged a glance with Tigerstar and shrugged. To the kits, he meowed. "Come on. Fireheart has spoken, and we must obey." The two kits backed away from their father and followed Darkstripe as he set off back to the camp. "Say goodbye to your father before you go," Fireheart meowed, forcing himself to speak in a friendly tone. "You'll see him again when you're apprentices and can go to gatherings." Both kits turned to mew goodbye. "Goodbye." "Goodbye," Tigerstar replied. "Work hard and I shall be proud of you." He and Fireheart stood side by side as Darkstripe led the kits back down the slope and across the stream. When they had disappeared into the undergrowth, Tigerstar meowed. "Take care of those kits, Fireheart. I'll be keeping an eye on them." Fireheart's heart was pounding. When he had exposed the former deputy's treachery, Tigerstar had threatened to kill him. Now they were alone once more, with no help nearby for Fireheart if the ShadowClan leader attacked. Fireheart's muscles tensed, but Tigerstar made no move toward him. "I'll see they're looked after," Fireheart meowed at last. "I'm sure they will be loyal to their clan. ThunderClan takes care of all its kits." "Really?" Tigerstar narrowed his amber eyes. "I'm glad to hear it." Tigerstar knew about the two kits who had been taken to Greypool. Fireheart remembered with a jolt. He waited for the ShadowClan leader to challenge him about that, but Tigerstar did not question him, though his knowing expression chilled Fireheart. It was as though he were well aware that Fireheart could tell him more. Instead, Tigerstar dipped his head again and mewed. "We shall meet at the next gathering. I must return to my clan now." Then he turned and padded away. Fireheart made sure the ShadowClan leader had really gone before he turned away too, following the border toward Four Trees. Much as he hated to admit it, he couldn't see that Darkstripe had done any real harm by taking the kits out of the nursery. Fireheart would have had to tell them eventually that their father was the leader of ShadowClan, and Tigerstar himself had behaved with more restraint than Fireheart would have believed possible. Firmly, he put the episode out of his mind. Time was running out. Before sunset, Fireheart knew he must speak with Tallstar and find another way to solve the dispute over the stolen prey. Chapter 13. Fireheart darted from one clump of gorse to the next as he crossed the moor toward the WindClan camp. He ran with his belly brushing the turf, trying to stay out of sight, and longing for the thick undergrowth of his own territory. The last time he had visited the camp, when ThunderClan helped WindClan in a battle against the other two clans, there had been no need to hide. Now he dared not show himself until he reached Tallstar, or at least met with one of the cats he could call his friends. If any of them were still friendly after the recent disastrous gathering. WindClan When clan patrols had attacked them on their territory before, they would be even more hostile now. The scent of WindClan was all around him, but so far he hadn't seen any cats. The sun had nearly finished crossing the sky. Fireheart tried not to think about that. He came close to panic, but when he remembered how little time was left before Bluestar would launch her attack. He was crossing one of the shallow moorland streams, bounding from rock to rock, when a strong scent of WindClan cats flooded over him, along with the scent of rabbit. Fireheart's belly growled in complaint, but he had to ignore it. There was no way he could take WindClan's prey now, and it smelled as if there was a hunting patrol not far behind anyway. Diving into a clump of bracken at the water's edge, he peered out cautiously to spot the source of the scent. 3 cats were making their way upstream toward him. At the front of the patrol was his old friend One Whisker, and Fireheart's heart lifted. Gorsepaw was with his mentor. They were both carrying rabbits, but to Fireheart's dismay, the third cat was Mudclaw, the dark, mottled warrior who had stopped Bluestar when she tried to cross WindClan territory to get to Highstones. This cat would never allow Fireheart to bring his message to Tallstar. But it seemed that luck, or the favor of StarClan, was on Fireheart's side. With their jaws full of prey, the WindClan cats were unable to pick up his ThunderClan scent, and they passed within a couple of tail lengths of him. Then Gorsepaw, who was struggling with a rabbit almost as big as he was, stopped to adjust his grip on it and fell behind the others. Fireheart spotted his chance. Gorsepaw. The young cat raised his head, ears pricked. Over here in the bracken. Gorsepaw turned and his eyes stretched wide when he saw Fireheart poking his head out from the rusty fronds. His mouth opened, but Fireheart urgently signaled to him to keep silent. Listen, Gorsepaw, he mewed. I want to tell One Whisker I'm here, but don't let Mudclaw know, okay? The apprentice hesitated, looking troubled, and Fireheart added urgently, I have to talk to him. It's important for both of our clans. You've got to trust me. The desperation in his tone reached Gorsepaw, who paused a moment longer and then gave a quick nod. All right, Fireheart, wait here. He picked up his rabbit again and hurried to catch up to the 2 warriors. Fireheart crept deeper into the bracken and crouched there, waiting. Before long, he heard another cat approach his hiding place in a murmur. Fireheart? Is that you? To his relief, Fireheart recognized One Whisker's voice. He peered warily out of the shelter of the bracken and straightened up when he saw that his friend was alone. Thanks, StarClan, he exclaimed. I thought you weren't coming. This had better be good. Fireheart, One Whisker meowed. He gave Fireheart a hard stare, with no trace of his usual friendliness. It took me a while to get rid of Mudclaw. If he knew you were on our territory, you'd be crow food, and you know it. He padded up to Fireheart. I'm sticking my neck out for you, he growled. I hope it's worth it. It is, I promise. I've come to tell you something. I've got to speak to Tallstar. It's important, he added, as One Whisker went on staring at him. For a few heartbeats, he was afraid that his friend was going to refuse, or even attack him and drive him off WindClan territory. Then One Whisker spoke, and to Fireheart's relief, he sounded less hostile. As if he were beginning to realize the urgency of Fireheart's request. What's it all about? Tallstar will have my fur off if I take a ThunderClan cat into camp without a very good reason. I can't tell you, One Whisker. I can't tell any cat except Tallstar. But believe me, it's for the good of both of our clans. Once again, One Whisker hesitated. I wouldn't do this for any other cat but you, Fireheart, he meowed at last. Spinning around, he beckoned with his tail and bounded off across the moor. Fireheart sprang after him. One Whisker halted at the top of the slope, looking down into the WindClan camp. The rays of the dying sun cast long shadows over the gorse bushes that lined the sides of the hollow. As Fireheart and One Whisker stood there, a patrol slipped past them. Fireheart was conscious of their stares, with her curiosity mingled with antagonism. Come on, meowed One Whisker. He led the way through the tough stems of gorse until they came to the sandy clearing in the middle of the bushes. As he emerged through the narrow gap in the thorns, Fireheart saw Tallstar crouched at one side of the clearing near a pile of fresh kill. More WindClan warriors clustered around him. It was the clan deputy, Deadfoot, who looked up first and then nudged his leader, mewing something rapidly into his ear. Tallstar rose and padded across the clearing to where Fireheart and One Whisker waited. Deadfoot hovered at his shoulder, and other cats followed close behind. Fireheart recognized Barkface, the WindClan medicine cat, and Mudclaw, his lips drawn back in a snarl. Well, One Whisker, Tallstar's voice was level, giving nothing away. Why have you brought Fireheart here? One Whisker dipped his head. He says he has to talk to you. And that means he can just stroll into our camp? Mudclaw spat. He's from an enemy clan. Tallstar waved his tail at Mudclaw, a sign for silence, while his eyes looked deep into Fireheart's. I'm here, he mewed simply. Talk. Fireheart glanced around him. The crowd was growing larger, as more WindClan cats heard about the intruder in their midst and came out to see what was going on. What I have to say is not for all ears, Tallstar, he stammered. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard a faint growl in Tallstar's throat, but then the WindClan leader nodded slowly. Very well, we will go to my den. Deadfoot, you come with us, and you, One Whisker. Turning, he stalked toward the rock at the far end of the clearing, his long tail held high, while the two warriors herded Fireheart after him. The WindClan leader's den was sheltered under a deep overhang in the rock, on the side away from the main camp. Tallstar entered and made himself comfortable in a nest of heather, facing Fireheart. Well, he meowed. Shadows were gathering in the den, and Fireheart could feel rather than see the shapes of the cats who guarded him. Tension crackled between them, as if they were waiting for the tiniest excuse to attack him. During his journey across the moor, he had thought hard about what he would say, but he still didn't know whether he would manage to convince Tallstar that there was a way to avoid Bluestar's attack. You know that Bluestar is unhappy about the loss of prey, Fireheart began. Instantly, the fur on the WindClan leader's shoulders began to bristle. WindClan did not steal prey from ThunderClan, he snapped. We've found scattered remains, too, Deadfoot asserted, limping forward and thrusting his muzzle close to Fireheart's. Are you sure ThunderClan haven't been stealing prey from us? Fireheart forced himself not to flinch. No, he protested. I don't believe any cats have stolen prey. What happened to it then? One Whisker asked. I think there's a dog living in the forest. We've smelled it and found its dung. A dog? One Whisker echoed. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. What, loose from its two legs? I'm certain of it, Fireheart meowed. Could be, meowed Tallstar. To Fireheart's relief, the fur on his shoulders was laying flat again. We've certainly scented dog on our territory recently. But then, they're always up here with their two legs. Sounding more confident, he went on. Yes, it could be a dog killing the rabbits. I'll see that our patrols keep a lookout. But you didn't come all this way to tell us that, Deadfoot meowed. So what's on your mind, Fireheart? Fireheart took a deep breath. He didn't want to betray Bluestar by telling Tallstar of her plans to attack, but he wanted to suggest to the WindClan leader that future battle could be avoided if he would just talk to Bluestar about the prey theft. I can't convince Bluestar about the dog, he explained. She feels threatened by WindClan, and sooner or later this will all end in battle unless we can do something. He could not tell the WindClan warriors how much sooner the battle would take place if he failed now. Cats will be injured, killed even for nothing. Then what do you expect me to do? Tallstar asked testedly. She's your leader, Fireheart. This is your problem. Fireheart dared to take a couple of steps forward toward the WindClan leader. I've come to ask you to hold a meeting with Bluestar. If you could discuss things in private, you might be able to make peace. Bluestar wants a meeting, It was Deadfoot who spoke, sounding disbelieving. Last time we saw her, she looked as if she would like to claw our throats out. This isn't Bluestar's idea. It's mine, Fireheart confessed. All three WindClan cats stared at him. Finally, it was One Whisker who broke the silence. Does that mean you're going behind your leader's back? It's for the good of both of our clans, he insisted. He half expected to be chased out of the camp, but to his relief, Tallstar was looking thoughtful. I'd certainly rather talk than fight, the leader meowed, but how are we going to arrange it? How willing to listen will she be if she knows that you have talked to us first without her knowledge? Not waiting for Fireheart to reply, he went on. Perhaps it would be best if I sent a messenger to ask her to meet me at Four Trees, but can you guarantee the safety of a WindClan cat on ThunderClan territory? Fireheart was silent, which was answer in itself. Tallstar shrugged. I'm sorry, Fireheart, I won't risk one of my warriors. If Bluestar decides that she's willing to talk, she knows where to find us. One Whisker, you'd better take Fireheart back to Four Trees. Wait, Fireheart protested. An idea had just slid into his mind, or perhaps StarClan had sent it to him. I know what you can do. Tallstar's eyes gleamed in the gathering darkness. What? Do you know the cat Ravenpaw? He's a loner who lives on a farm on the edge of your territory near Highstones. He sheltered us on the journey to bring you home, remember? I know him, meowed One Whisker. He's a decent cat, even if he's not a warrior. What about him? Fireheart turned to him eagerly. He could take the message for you, and Bluestar has given him permission to enter ThunderClan territory, as he used to be a ThunderClan cat. Tallstar shifted in his nest of heather. That sounds like it might work. What do you think, Deadfoot? A reluctant rumble of agreement came from the deputy. Then go, Fireheart urged One Whisker, realizing once again how quickly time was running out. Go now. Tell him to ask Bluestar to meet Tallstar at dawn, at Four Trees. There was barely enough time for One Whisker to find Ravenpaw, and for Ravenpaw to carry the message all the way to the ThunderClan camp before Bluestar would be leaving to launch her attack. Fireheart sent a silent prayer to StarClan that One Whisker would be able to find Ravenpaw easily on the Two-Lake farm. One Whisker glanced at his leader, who nodded. At once, the brown tabby warrior turned around and disappeared into the darkness outside of the den. Tallstar gazed at Fireheart with narrowed eyes. Why do I think there's something you're not telling me? He mewed. To Fireheart's relief, he did not press for more answers. It's time for you to go, he continued. Deadfoot, escort him off our territory, and Fireheart, I'll be at Four Trees at dawn, but that's all I can do. If Bluestar wants peace, she must be there. 4 trees at dawn, Fireheart repeated, and followed the deputy out. Fireheart made good time back to Four Trees and onto his own territory. He had not eaten since before the gathering on the previous night. His belly ached with hunger, and he was beginning to feel shaky on his paws, so he forced himself to stop and hunt. He paused to listen when he reached the stream, and his ears caught the sound of a vole scuffling amongst the reeds at the water's edge. Lifting his head to taste the air, Fireheart pinpointed the creature more by scent than sight. He pounced and his claws sank into the prey. Gulping it down, he felt strength flow back into him, and he headed for his own camp with renewed speed. The moon had risen above the trees by the time he slipped down the ravine, reminding Fireheart that he had until moonset to choose warriors for Bluestar's planned attack. His optimism was returning. Tallstar had agreed to talk. Surely Bluestar would realize that war with WindClan was unnecessary. He had almost reached the entrance to the clearing when he heard a cat call his name. He turned to see Whitestorm, following him down the ravine at the head of the evening patrol. Brightpaw, Cloudpaw, and Frostfur were with him. Everything quiet? Fireheart asked as Whitestorm came up to him. Quiet as a sleeping kit, the White Warrior replied. No sign of the dog. Maybe its 2 legs found it after all. Maybe, Fireheart meowed. Suddenly he decided to tell Whitestorm where he had been. He wanted at least one other warrior to share the hope that they might not have to go into battle against WindClan. Actually, Whitestorm, I wanted a word with you about that. Can you give me a moment? Of course, if you don't mind me eating while I listen. Whitestorm sent the 2 apprentices to go take prey for themselves, then bounded over to the pile of fresh kill and fell into a friendly scuffle over a magpie. Frostfur padded off to the warrior's den with a vole, while Whitestorm chose a squirrel for himself and carried it over to a quiet corner by the newly sprouting nettle patch. Fireheart followed him. Whitestorm, Bluestar sent for me this morning. Quietly, he told the older warrior the whole story, from Bluestar's obsessive belief that WindClan had been stealing prey in her order to attack, to Fireheart's decision to ask WindClan for a meeting. What? Whitestorm stared at Fireheart in disbelief. You went behind Bluestar's back. His voice failed, and he shook his head in confusion. Fireheart immediately felt defensive. What else could I do? You could have consulted me. The fur on Whitestorm's shoulders bristled angrily. Or some of the other senior warriors. We would have helped you find a solution. I'm sorry, Fireheart's heart was pounding. I didn't want anyone else to get in trouble. I did what I thought was best. It was because of the warrior code that he had acted alone, knowing that he could not ask any other cat to challenge Bluestar's order like this. Whitestorm's gaze was intensely thoughtful. I think we need to tell the other warriors about this, he meowed at last. They'll need to be ready for Bluestar's attack in case Ravenpaw doesn't get here, and even if Bluestar agrees to meet Tallstar, she might want a patrol behind her. I'd bet a moon's worth of dawn patrols that Tallstar guesses something's up. We can't be sure that he won't ambush us. Fireheart nodded respectfully. You're right, Whitestorm. I trust them, but we should be prepared. I'll find some apprentices to guard the camp. Whitestorm meowed. You gather the warriors. Fireheart ran across the clearing to the warriors' den. Most of them were already there, curled up in their nests asleep. Fireheart prodded Sandstorm with a paw to rouse her. She blinked up at him. What is it? Wake the others, please, Sandstorm. Fireheart meowed. Whitestorm and I have something important to tell everybody. Sandstorm scrambled to her paws. What do you mean, something important? It's the middle of the night. Fireheart went out again without answering, to look for the remaining warriors. He found Brindleface visiting the queens in the nursery, and Mousefur coming into the camp with her jaws full of fresh kill after a late-night patrol. He wondered whether he ought to call Cinderpelt, but decided it would be better to explain the situation to her individually. By the time he returned to the warriors' den, the other cats were fully awake. A moment later, Whitestorm padded under the shelter of the branches and sat down at Fireheart's side. What's all this about? Darkstripe asked bad-temperedly, flicking moss off one ear. It'd better be good. Fireheart felt his stomach churn with nervousness, as he wondered how his clanmates would react when they heard what he had done. Whitestorm nodded at him, nudging him to speak. Taking a deep breath, Fireheart began. He explained Bluestar's plan to attack, and how he had tried to work out a peaceful solution instead. His clanmates listened in stunned silence. Fireheart was acutely conscious of their eyes fixed on him, glowing in the moonlight that filtered through the gaps in the den's roof. In particular, he was aware of Sandstorm's pale green gaze, where she sat crouched near the outer branches, but he could not bring himself to look directly at her. He just hoped that the warriors would understand he had done this for the best of reasons, to avoid battle and save lives. So Tallstar agreed to meet Bluestar at Four Trees, he finished. Ravenpaw should be here any time now to tell her about the meeting. He braced himself for an outburst from the other warriors, but no cat seemed to know what to say. They merely looked at each other in bewilderment. Eventually Mousefur asked, Whitestorm, do you agree with what Fireheart has done? Fireheart waited, his eyes fixed on his paws. He desperately needed Whitestorm's support because of the respect he commanded from the other warriors, but he knew that Whitestorm did not completely approve of his actions, however well-intentioned. I wouldn't have done it. Whitestorm spoke with his usual quiet authority, but I think he's right about not attacking WindClan. I don't believe they have taken any of our prey. There is a dog loose. I've scented it myself. So have I around Snake Rocks, confirmed Mousefur. At Four Trees, too, meowed Brackenfur. We can't blame WindClan for that. But you're asking us to keep secrets from Bluestar. Sandstorm rose to her paws, and at last Fireheart had to meet her challenging green stare. A jolt of dismay ran through Fireheart. He had not expected Sandstorm to be the first cat to object to what he had done. I'm sorry, he mewed. I didn't think I had a choice. Just what I would expect from a kitty pet, growled Darkstripe. Do you have any idea of what the warrior code means? I know very well what it means, Fireheart defended himself. It is because of my loyalty to the clan that I don't want to fight an unnecessary battle, and I respect StarClan as much as any cat. I don't believe it's their will that we attack tonight. Darkstripe twitched his ears scornfully, but he said no more. Fireheart glanced around, wondering whether he was winning the support of his warriors. When Bluestar gave up her last life and went to join StarClan, he realized uncomfortably he might have to lead this clan, and if he could not command their loyalty and respect, the task would be impossible. This is what's important, he went on desperately. WindClan haven't done anything wrong, and we have enough to do, rebuilding the camp and keeping up the patrols without fighting an unnecessary, dangerous battle. How will we keep ourselves fed and prepared for Leaf Bear if we have warriors injured or even killed? He's right, Brindleface spoke up, and the others turned to look at her. Our children would be in the battle, she went on, quietly. We don't want them hurt for nothing. Frostfur added her agreement, but the rest of the warriors were still murmuring among themselves. Again he was aware of Sandstorm, and the distress in her pale green eyes. He could understand how torn she must feel now, between her loyalty to Bluestar and her commitment to him. Right now Fireheart wanted nothing more than to press himself against her flank and forget all of this in the sweet scent of her fur, but he had to go on standing in front of his warriors, waiting for their verdict on whether they would support him or not. So what do you want us to do? Longtail meowed at last. I'll need a party of warriors ready to go with Bluestar to Four Trees, Fireheart replied. If Ravenpaw doesn't come, or if Bluestar doesn't agree to talk, then she'll lead us into battle, and if that happens... His voice failed, he swallowed. Yes, then what? Sandstorm demanded. Do you want us to disobey Blue Star's direct orders? Turn around and run away? Dustpelt, tell Fireheart what a mouse-brained idea that is. Dustpelt's ears pricked in surprise. Fireheart knew very well that part of the Brown Warrior's antagonism towards him was because Sandstorm so clearly preferred Fireheart now. He braced himself for more criticism, but Dustpelt meowed hesitantly. I don't know, Sandstorm. Fireheart's right that it's a bad time for a battle. Besides, no cat can seriously believe that WindClan is stealing our prey. If Blue Star thinks so, then, well, he broke off, scuffling his paws in confusion. It's understandable that Blue Star can't trust WindClan, Fireheart mewed, instinctively defending his leader. Not since they stopped her going to High Stones. And we've never known dogs loosed in the forest before. But there is no evidence at all that WindClan took those rabbits, and plenty of evidence that a dog did. So what do you suggest if it comes to a battle? Fireheart asked Mousefur. Come back to the camp when Blue Star gives the orders to attack. No, Fireheart replied. Tallstar seemed willing to meet Blue Star in peace, and if we're lucky, we'll have only 1 or 2 warriors with him. If we're lucky, he'll only have 1 or 2 warriors with him. It won't come to a fight. That's a pretty big if, mewed Mousefur, with a skeptical flick to her tail. What if WindClan assumes the same thing, and set an ambush for us? We'd be crow food. Fireheart winced as she voiced Whitestorm's own doubts about whether they could trust Tallstar. I'm not going, Longtail announced loudly. Let WindClan tear us apart? I'm not mouse-brained. Dustpelt, who was sitting next to him, turned his head and gave him a scorching look of contempt. No, you're a coward, he meowed. I'm not, Longtail's protest was shrill. I'm a loyal ThunderClan cat. Fine, Longtail, Fireheart broke in. We don't need every warrior to go. You can stay and guard the camp. And that goes for the rest of you, he added. If you don't want to be part of this, stay here. He waited tensely for his warrior's response, looking around at their troubled faces in the dim light of the den. I'll go, meowed Whitestorm at last. I think we can trust Tallstar not to fight, if there is an alternative. Fireheart shot him a grateful glance as the other warriors hesitated, murmuring to each other or shifting uncomfortably among the mossy bedding. I'll go too, Brackenfur sounded nervous to be the first to speak among so many older warriors. So will I, mewed Dustpelt. His tail lashed once in Fireheart's direction. But if WindClan attack, I'll fight. I'm not going to be clawed apart for any cat. The rest of the warriors joined in. To Fireheart's surprise, Darkstripe agreed to go, while Mousefur refused. I'm sorry, Fireheart, she meowed. I think you're talking sense, but that's not the point. The warrior code isn't something you stick to just when you feel like it. I don't think I could disobey my leader if she ordered me to attack. Well, I will go, Brindleface asserted. I don't want to see my kits torn to pieces in a battle we don't have to fight. I'll go too, meowed Frostfur. Her gaze swept over the warriors around her as she added, We don't raise kits to fight in unjust battles. At last, Fireheart had to face Sandstorm, who so far had nothing to say. He could not imagine what he would do if she refused to support him. Sandstorm, he meowed hesitantly. Sandstorm crouched with her head down, not meeting his eyes. I'll go along with you, Fireheart, she muttered. I know you're right about the dogs, but I still hate lying to Blue Star. Fireheart moved to her side and gave her ear a quick lick, wanting to thank her, but she jerked her head away without looking at him. What about the apprentices? Darkstripe asked. Do you want them to come with us? Fernpaw's too young to get involved. I agree, Dustpelt mewed swiftly. For all his tension, Fireheart had to suppress a purr of amusement to hear Dustpelt betraying the soft spot he felt for Darkstripe's apprentice. I'd prefer to keep Brightpaw out of it as well, meowed Whitestorm. But won't Blue Star think there's something odd if we don't take any apprentices with us? Asked Brackenfur. That's a good point. Fireheart nodded at the young warrior. Okay, we'll take Swiftpaw and Cloudpaw, but only if Blue Star wants to take that many cats with her. And we'll tell them what's going on after we leave. The news will be all around camp otherwise. Fireheart realized to his surprise that he had more warriors on his side than he needed. If Ravenpaw made it to the camp on time and Blue Star agreed to go and talk to Tallstar, it would seem odd if a whole fighting patrol of warriors offered to go with her. Besides, he didn't want to leave the camp vulnerable to attack, especially now. Why don't Frostfur and Brackenfur stay to help guard camp, he suggested. I am grateful for your support, but you may be needed here. Brackenfur and Frostfur exchanged a glance and then nodded. Now the rest of you had better get some sleep, he continued. We leave at moonset. He watched the warriors settle down in their bedding, but he did not join them. He knew he had no chance of sleeping, and he wanted to tell Cinderpelt what was going on before she heard it from any other cat. If it weren't for his faith in Spotted Leaf, he would have started to doubt long ago that he could stop this battle. There seemed to be so much that could go wrong. Ravenpaw might not bring the message in time. Bluestar might refuse to talk to Hallstar. WindClan might ambush them at Four Trees. Giving himself a shake, Fireheart emerged into the clearing. He glanced around for any sign of Ravenpaw, but the camp lay silent in the moonlight. A pair of eyes gleamed from the entrance to the gorse tunnel, and as Fireheart padded closer, he made out the pale shape of Ashpaw on guard. "Do you know who Ravenpaw is?" he asked, and when the apprentice nodded, he went on. "He hasn't been here tonight, has he?" Looking puzzled, Ashpaw shook his head. "If he comes," Fireheart instructed him, "let him in, and take him straight to Bluestar, okay?" "Okay, Fireheart." Ashpaw was clearly bursting with curiosity, but he didn't ask any questions. Fireheart nodded to him and went off to find Cinderpelt, padding up to the medicine cat's den. He saw her sitting outside, deep in conversation with Mousefur. Both cats looked around at his approach. "Fireheart?" Cinderpelt meowed, rising slowly to her paws. "What's all this Mousefur is telling me? Why wasn't I invited to the meeting?" Her blue eyes blazed with annoyance. "It was just for the warriors," Fireheart replied, though explanation sounded feeble even for him. "Oh, right," mewed Cinderpelt dryly. "You thought I wouldn't be interested in keeping secrets from Bluestar." "It's not like that," Fireheart protested. "I was coming to tell you now. Mousefur," he added, giving the she-cat a hostile glance, "aren't you supposed to be resting?" Mousefur returned his glare, then spun around and vanished into the darkness. "Well?" prompted Cinderpelt. "It sounds as if Mousefur has already told you. I don't like this situation any more than you, but what choice is there? Do you really think that StarClan want a war in the forest, especially an unjust war?" "StarClan have shown me nothing about any battles," Cinderpelt admitted, "and I don't want bloodshed, but is this the only way to stop it? If you can think of a better idea, tell me." Cinderpelt shook her head. Moonlight shone on her gray fur, giving her a ghostly appearance, as if she were already halfway into the world of StarClan. "Whatever you do, Fireheart, be careful of Bluestar. Be gentle with her. She was a great leader, and she might be again." Fireheart wanted so much to believe the medicine cat, but each day Bluestar seemed to slide further into confusion. The wise mentor he had respected when he first came to ThunderClan seemed very far away. "I'll do my best," he promised. "I don't want to deceive her, but that's why I've organized this meeting with Tallstar. I want her to realize we don't have to fight. And she won't listen to me," tensely he added. "Do you think I'm wrong?" "It's not for me to say." Cinderpelt met his gaze steadily. "This is your decision, Fireheart. No cat can make it for you." And that is where we will stop. So I hope everyone enjoyed listening, and I hope you have a good evening and a good night. Till next time, my friends. Take care.